Sarah twisted the ring on her finger. The gold band, once gleaming with promise, now felt like a dead weight against her skin. She'd barely glanced in the mirror lately, afraid she might not like what she saw. A stranger with tired eyes and a faded smile stared back at her. Weeks melted into each other. Work, a few half-hearted chores after Mark left, then the dull thud of the TV remote against the couch. Marriage shouldn't feel this flat, should it? Then that stupid work conference. She'd almost spilled coffee on Alex. Tall, unfairly handsome, with an easy grin. That jolt of something at the way he'd said no worries had stayed with her all week. Absurd. What are you getting all dolled up for? Mark had asked as she swiped on lipstick. Just a slightly brighter shade. Nothing bold. Out for coffee. Work thing? Networking, she'd muttered. Pathetically transparent. Mark hadn't seemed to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore. The cafe was crowded, too noisy. Alex spotted her, and his grin spread. He had that kind of smile that made everyone else in the room seem unimportant. Her cheeks flushed. She hoped it looked professional, not like a nervous schoolgirl. Networking. Huh? Alex teased, settling into the seat across from her. Guess this beats some boring slide presentation. Her laugh felt too loud. Those can be brutal, she admitted. They talked shop for a bit, then Alex leaned in slightly. So, what about the real you, Sarah? What lights your fire? She hesitated. Did she even remember the real her anymore? The safe answer would be predictable hobbies, maybe a cliché about loving long walks with Mark. Instead she blurted out, honestly, lately nothing. It's like, she trailed off, then took a risk. It's like I'm on autopilot. Alex's smile faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't quite read. I get that, he said softer. Ever wonder if there's more? Something out there you haven't even glimpsed yet? The conversation danced on that edge. Thrill mixed with something close to danger. They both knew they were getting close to a line. Sarah glanced at her watch, feeling a mix of panic and a strange sort of freedom. I gotta run, but hey, don't be a stranger at the next conference, she said, her voice slightly breathless. Alex just nodded, but something in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Had she imagined that flash of heat, or had it echoed the thrill she was desperately trying to ignore? The next day, every email felt like it was from Alex. Every phone buzz sent her stomach churning. Was he thinking about her too? The idea was crazy, thrilling, and a little bit terrifying. At lunch, she caught herself staring at her boring sandwich and picturing Alex's smirk instead. Work dragged on. She couldn't even fake interest in the project meeting. Her colleagues' chatter sounded far away, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. She slipped out early, lying about a headache, home alone. The silence pressed in, suffocating. She paced, restless. It was wrong, all of it. But what was worse, admitting she'd become a stranger to herself, or the jolt of excitement every time she thought about Alex. Mark wouldn't be back for hours. One text wouldn't hurt, right? Drinks to shake off this workday? Just a friendly thing? She typed, then hit delete. It was pathetic. A schoolgirl with a crush. After an agonizing 10 minutes, she settled for a watered-down version. Crazy week. How about a quick drink later? His reply was almost immediate. Absolutely. Usual place, 7. A wave of guilt crashed over her. What was she doing? But the guilt warred with an electrifying thrill she hadn't felt in years. She took a deep breath and sent back a simple, see you then. Getting dressed was a blur. Should she change? Look nicer? Act casual? No, that would be too obvious. Yet she lingered over her makeup a bit longer, just a hint of boldness she normally wouldn't dare. At the bar Alex was already there. The sight of him, the casual way he leaned back, that familiar spark in his eyes, made her excuses feel flimsy. Rough week? Huh? He asked, sliding her a glass of wine. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. You have no idea, she muttered. Want to tell me about it? His voice was low, a hint of something more than friendly curiosity. For a second she almost did. Almost blurted out the truth. How trapped she felt. How desperate she was for something. But she just shrugged. It's dumb married stuff. You wouldn't get it. She forced a light chuckle, and was relieved when Alex dropped the subject. The rest of the evening was a strange mix. Guilt gnawed at her, but also a defiant little flicker deep down. Was it wrong to just feel good for a little while? The emergency client report. Sarah lied to Mark, her voice too high-pitched. Boss is freaking out. He barely looked up from his book, just grunted. Don't stay too late. Okay? She met Alex in the dimly lit parking garage. His car seemed like a whole other world, smelling of expensive cologne and a kind of freedom she didn't have anymore. They drove to a generic hotel on the edge of town. The kind you'd only notice if you were looking for it. Work thing. Huh? Alex chuckled as the elevator doors slid shut. Gotta keep up appearances, she mumbled. Inside the room the pretense dissolved. Hours melted into each other. Stolen touches, shared whispers, a desperation that went beyond just physical. Back home, she fell into bed next to Mark, his warmth a painful contrast to the lingering heat of Alex's skin on hers. Shame flooded her, but the excitement warred with it, buzzing under her skin like she was coming down from something potent. The text started the next day. Coded jokes, innocent-looking emojis that held a thrill just between them. Sarah became obsessed, phone always in hand, heart pounding every time it buzzed. Mark seemed oblivious. She told herself it was pity more than love that made his tired smile hurt so much. Their second meeting was bolder. A kiss in the quiet back corner of a coffee shop. A rush of danger that sent them stumbling out like teenagers. That kiss changed everything. Excuses piled up. Late meetings, surprise work trips. Mark seemed to accept them. A dullness in his eyes that twisted something deep inside her. She clung to the nights with Alex. Their cheap hotel rooms transformed into a desperate, passionate little world. The risks got bigger. The lies more tangled. Lying in bed, the weight of it became too much. She almost reached for Mark, the words, I have to tell you something bubbling up. Instead she rolled over and pictured Alex's face. Sleep when it finally came was ragged and haunted. Mark's sad eyes accusing. Alex's whispered promises twisting into something mocking. When she woke, exhausted, the craving for Alex had already won. Sarah had planned it all out. On Mark's birthday she'd sit him down, tears streaming. The whole it's not you it's me routine. Then she would break free, honest and guiltless, ready to start a new life with Alex. But at dinner, Mark smiled at her, a genuine smile, like he used to before everything got so gray. His gift, a book she'd mentioned in passing weeks ago, made her throat tighten. How could she do this to him? Thank you, she choked out. It felt like a lie worse than any of the fake business trips. She escaped for a long walk. Her phone buzzed. Wish I was there to celebrate with you, Alex, of course. Anger flared. He didn't get to be sweet when he was the reason for all of this mess. But another part of her, the part she hated, craved that warmth, the feeling of being desired. That night she pushed Alex away. I can't, she said. This has to stop. The hurt in his eyes stung. So what? Now you got your kicks. You're going back to hubby. It's not that simple, she protested, too weakly for her own liking. Sure seems that way. He snapped back. His words lingered, making her question her own motives. The next lie to Mark spilled out so easily she was terrified at how good she'd become at this. But this time she saw him hesitate. Did he sense something was off? His touch on her arm was gentle, a question in his eyes. Let's go away. Just you and me, like we used to. His voice cracked a little on that last part. Guilt washed over her. This was what she had always wanted. A husband who cared, who was trying. Yet the image of Alex flickered at the edge of her mind. A tempting shadow she couldn't shake. The weekend getaway was a farce. Sarah faked laughter, pretended interest, all while counting the hours until she could see Alex again. She tried to make up for it. Small kindnesses for Mark, hoping it would ease the shame. It didn't. So, how do we fix this? She blurted out to Alex in their usual hotel room. For real, can we have a future? He shrugged, and something in her shattered a little. Of course not. This was fun, stolen, but it wasn't real. Don't worry about that now, he said, kissing her neck, but it felt emptier this time. He didn't want to fix anything. He was fine with the way things were. The next morning Alex's words lingered like a bad hangover. I'm starting to get tired of sneaking around, Sarah. Fun as this is, I'm not the other man kind of guy. It wasn't an ultimatum, but something in it stung. Sarah, who'd always prided herself on being strong and in control, felt desperate and small. He was right. She was just his stolen time, not someone he'd build a life with. Driving home, she felt the panic rising. What if Alex ended it? The thrill of the affair dimmed, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Then she walked through the door, and the trap snapped shut again. Mark had decked out the living room. Flowers, champagne, the cheesy candles she'd always secretly mocked. Their anniversary. How had she forgotten? Her stomach churned with guilt so thick, she could barely look him in the eye. Surprise. His smile was so bright, so full of hope, it made her want to scream. He pulled her into a hug, oblivious to the way she went rigid in his arms. Dinner was a blur of forced conversation and half-finished champagne. Every kind word from Mark felt like a nail hammered deeper. Images of Alex flashed in her mind, then faded into the dull ache of Mark's hand on hers across the table. Which betrayal was worse? That night, lying in bed, she stared at the darkness. The confession twisted inside her, a bitter promise. "I have to tell you," she whispered. But the empty space beside her echoed back silence. The next few days passed in a haze of exhaustion and avoidance. Alex's texts became demanding, then petulant. She barely replied. The flame of the affair sputtering out. Mark tried even harder, small gestures of love that now felt suffocating. One evening, standing at the kitchen sink, a wave of nausea washed over her. She wasn't sick. The nausea was a bone-deep fear, the realization echoing in her head. She wasn't ready to end the affair, not because of Alex, but because the alternative, facing Mark's devastation, facing the ruin of everything, was too much to bear. The shame burned like hot acid. She was a coward, a monster, the worst kind of cliché copyright. Yet even as these words formed in her mind, she knew she would do it all again, lie again, and again if it meant not facing the truth. It shouldn't have even happened. Alex, sloppy with his own lies, sent a text meant for someone else. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." And Mark saw it. Her fumble for a pathetic excuse about work drinks with a client died in her throat at the look on his face. "Don't insult me, Sarah." His voice was flat, so unlike his usual warmth it was like a stranger had walked into their house. "Who is he?" She sputtered denials. But there were no lies that could fix this. He didn't shout, didn't rage. He just looked at her, the light in his eyes dying, replaced by a cold disgust she'd never seen before. I can explain," she choked out. "No," he cut her off. "Don't bother. I see it all so clearly now." Tears spilled, tears of shame and terror. She launched into a barrage of half-baked apologies, promises, begging him for another chance. But he stood there, arms stiff at his sides, a wall she couldn't break through. And then the worst. "I should have listened to myself," he said, so low she almost didn't hear it. "For months a little voice told me something was wrong, but I didn't want to see it." That was worse than any screaming match. It was the proof that she'd not only destroyed his trust, she'd crushed his hope, and the realization of how deeply she damaged him shattered something inside her. She reached out, desperate to touch him, to prove there was still something real between them. He flinched away. The gesture, small and sharp, was the final blow. "Just go," he said. His voice broke slightly on that last word, and that nearly destroyed her more than anything else. "Mark, please." She choked out a pathetic whimper. "No," he said again, firmer. "I can't even look at you right now. Just go." Numbly she gathered a few things in a bag, the silence suffocating. As she walked out the door she turned back once, hoping he might change his mind, some flicker of forgiveness. But he was already gone, the closed door echoing the finality of it all. Every thud of Mark's suitcase against the stairs was a hammer blow. It was so methodical, each item of clothing he folded with such chilling calm. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction. This was the end, decided and deliberate. "I'll be back for the rest of my things later," he said, finally looking at her. "I need to think to process everything." His voice was devoid of anger, just bone-deep exhaustion, and somehow that emptiness was even more devastating. "Mark, please, let's talk about this. I was stupid. I'll never do it again." I swear. She knew how pathetic she sounded, how useless the words were. Sarah, he cut her off but gently. There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choice. As he walked out the door, she wanted to scream, chase after him, beg at his feet, but her legs wouldn't move. The silence swallowed her whole, and with it came the gut-churning reality. She'd done this. This was her fault. The panic hit then. Alex. She had to call Alex. He would fix this. Tell her everything would be okay. She fumbled for her phone, tears blurring the numbers. His voice, when he answered, was tight and unfamiliar. Alex, it's Mark. Found out. Everything's blown up. I just... Whoa, hold on. Slow down. What do you mean he found out? His tone was sharp, edged with something that wasn't concern. He saw a text. He knows? Her voice broke, replaced by a ragged sob. Look, Sarah, Alex said, and his tone was like ice. I never said I'd leave my wife for you. Okay? This was fun, but I was never gonna blow up my life for this. The word this hung in the air, a brutal dismissal of everything they'd had. And then he said the worst thing yet. Honestly, Sarah, get a grip. This is your mess to deal with. Click. He hung up. She collapsed onto the floor, sobs racking her body. Alex's cruel rejection was the final nail in the coffin, the proof of her devastating isolation. She was alone. Time lost all meaning. Days melted into one another. Was this Tuesday or still Monday? Meals were forgotten, and the shower was a place she avoided because it forced her to look at her own reflection. Each unanswered text she fired off to Mark was another blow to her dwindling hope. Silence echoed back, a constant reminder that the kind, open man she once knew was gone, replaced by a stranger carved from ice. The worst were the fragments of memories that ambushed her. Laughter over a silly inside joke with Mark, a shared look of contentment over a quiet dinner. Images now poisoned by the knowledge that she'd thrown it all away. The gossip slithered in like a noxious fog. Whispers at the grocery store, a sympathetic head tilt from a once close friend who now crossed the street to avoid her. Judgment, whether real or imagined, felt like acid on raw skin. I heard people would start then trail off pretending kindness, while their eyes gleamed with the salacious thrill of another's downfall. She wanted to scream that they didn't know her, that she wasn't that kind of person before. Now, she wasn't so sure anymore. Nights were an endless torture. In dreams, Mark's face twisted with fresh pain and Alex's dismissive words echoed, "Get a grip? This is your mess." Sleep became the enemy and exhaustion, just another layer to her unending misery. Once she'd been the type with a busy social calendar, a job she enjoyed. Now every invitation felt like a landmine and work was a special kind of hell. She'd duck into empty conference rooms, pretending to be busy, just to avoid the looks she was convinced were aimed at her. One evening despair was a physical weight. Before thinking, she was in her car, driving to the house she'd shared with Mark. Stupid, pointless. But her loneliness outweighed any shred of logic. The lights were on, warm yellow spilling from the windows. A moving van was parked in the driveway. Through the living room window, she saw a woman laughing. Reaching up to place a photo frame on the fireplace mantel, Sarah's stomach lurched. Someone else was already building a life here, a life that should have been hers. She turned away, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't just the end of her marriage, it was the end of her, the person she used to be. Driving home, she felt hollowed out, a shell of a woman filled only with regret. The woman laughed again. Sarah crouched in the shadows like a pathetic stalker, wondered what kind of joke she might be sharing. The laughter was easy, light, the kind Sarah hadn't heard in her own voice for what seemed like an eternity. Another sob tore through her, making her double over. She couldn't look anymore. Each flickering image from inside that house was a searing reminder of everything she had destroyed. A life with Mark, the stupid dream of children, even the simple promise of a cozy Sunday morning. All of it gone. She stumbled back to her car, fumbling for her keys. The phone screen glared back at her, mockingly empty. No missed calls, no texts, not even junk spam. Nothing from Mark. The silence was her constant, suffocating companion. Days later, the envelope arrived, thick cream-colored. Her hand shook as she tore it open. Mark's lawyer, the formal letterhead, the clinical language outlining the end of their marriage. It felt less like reading and more like a verdict slamming down. No, she choked out, crumpling the paper. Hot tears fell, making the words blur. This couldn't be real. It was just a nightmare. One she'd surely wake from any moment now. But the nightmare refused to end. Despair settled over her, heavy and suffocating. For a dangerous moment she considered downing the bottle of 2 strong painkillers tucked in the bathroom cabinet. It would quiet the voices in her head. The endless loop of if onlys and why did I? A sliver of instinct stopped her. Sarah wasn't sure if it was self-preservation or a pathetic animal-level desire to survive. She found a crumpled business card in her wallet. A therapist recommended by a friend months ago. Making the call felt like lifting a boulder. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, the words spilling out in a clumsy torrent of shame and half-truths. They set an appointment. Going was going to be 1,000 times worse than making the call, but it felt like the first step on a path she hadn't even been able to see before. Therapy was brutal, forcing her to look directly at the ugliness she'd become, the selfishness that had masqueraded as wanting more. Her therapist thankfully didn't traffic in pity or coddling excuses. Weeks became months. It was the hardest work Sarah had ever done. There were no sudden breakthroughs, no lightning bolt of absolution, just the slow, painstaking task of examining her choices and their devastating fallout. Yet something did shift. With every agonizing session, the despair lessened its grip. Tiny flickers of something that might one day resemble determination began to appear. She didn't know if she'd ever be happy. It was a stifling summer night, the kind where the air feels heavy with secrets. Mark and I were seated on our old, creaky balcony, sipping red wine under the dim glow of the moon. Our conversations had always been our sanctuary, a dance of words where we hid nothing from each other. Or so he believed. "Mark," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling like the leaves in the gentle night breeze. "There's something I need to tell you. Something important." He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the trust one was about to shatter. "What is it, Elise? How do you confess to the man you love that his trust, his unwavering loyalty, was built on a foundation of lies? How do you tell him that the warmth he feels in our bed has been shared with others?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my confession pressing down on me. "I've been unfaithful," I said, the words escaping like prisoners from my lips. Mark froze, his wine glass pausing midway to his mouth. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of a car passing by. I watched as a myriad of emotions played across his face. Confusion, disbelief, hurt. "But why, Elise?" His voice was a mix of pain and incredulity. "I thought we were happy." I looked away, unable to bear the pain in his eyes. "I don't know," I lied. The truth was far more complex, entangled in a web of desires and fears I wasn't ready to unravel. Mark set down his glass, his hands shaking slightly. "Is there someone else? Someone you love?" "No, it's not about love. It's, how could I explain the thrill, the rush of adrenaline that came from the chase, the conquest? How could I tell him that it was never about the other man, but about the escape they offered from the monotony of our everyday life?" He stood up, pacing back and forth on the balcony. "How long, Elise? How long has this been going on?" I swallowed hard. "Months," I confessed. Each word felt like a betrayal, yet with each confession, I felt a burden lifting. Mark stopped pacing and looked at me, his face a mask of hurt and betrayal. "I need some time to think about this," he said quietly, then walked back into our apartment, leaving me alone with my guilt in the haunting silence of the night. As I sat there, the cool night air brushing against my skin, I realized the enormity of what I had done. I had broken the heart of the only man who had ever truly loved me. And for what? A few fleeting moments of excitement? The night stretched on, and I sat there, lost in my thoughts, wondering if the dawn would bring forgiveness or the end of everything we had built together. The balcony, once a haven of laughter and whispered dreams, now felt like a cold, judgmental witness to my confession. Mark's absence inside our apartment echoed loudly in my heart. His footsteps, once a comforting rhythm in our shared space, now sounded like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments of a relationship in peril. I hugged my knees, staring out into the darkness. The city lights flickered in the distance, indifferent to the turmoil within me. I thought about the men, the anonymous faces in the crowd that had momentarily filled a void I couldn't even name. They were escapes, each one a detour from a path I had willingly chosen with Mark. But why? Was it the thrill? The desire to feel wanted in a way that was different from the steady love Mark offered? Or was it something deeper? A fear of the mundane, of being ordinary? My mind circled these questions like a bird of prey, yet I found no satisfying answers. I remembered the first time. It was a chance encounter, a spark that ignited something reckless within me. Each subsequent affair was a chase for that initial high, a desperate grasp at feeling alive. But each time, as the stranger's touch cooled, I was left colder, more hollow than before. The door to the balcony slid open, and Mark reappeared, his face unreadable. He sat down beside me, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the pain I had caused. "Talk to me, Elise," he said softly. "Help me understand." I turned to face him, the man I loved, the man I had betrayed. "It's like I'm two people, Mark. One who loves you deeply, who cherishes every moment with you, and another who's driven by something I can't control, a force that pushes me away from you, towards danger, towards the unknown." Mark's eyes searched mine, looking for the woman he knew. "Is it something I did? Something I'm not giving you?" "No, it's not you. It's me. It's all me," I said, feeling the sting of tears. "You've been nothing but wonderful. It's my own demons, my own insecurities and desires." We sat in silence, the night wrapping around us like a shroud. Mark took my hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "What happens now, Elise? Can we move past this?" I wanted to say yes, to promise him that it would never happen again. But the truth was, I didn't know. The part of me that sought these affairs was still there, lurking in the shadows of my heart. "I don't know, Mark. I want to say we can. I want to make things right. But I'm scared. Scared that I'll hurt you again." Mark nodded, his eyes glistening in the moonlight. "I love you, Elise. But I don't know if that's enough anymore." His words cut through me, a painful yet honest admission. We were at a crossroads, our future together uncertain. The night air grew chillier as we sat there, lost in our thoughts, each grappling with the reality of a love tested by betrayal. As dawn approached, with its promise of a new day, I wondered if our relationship, like the night, was coming to an end, or if, somehow, we could find a way to begin again, to rebuild from the ruins of my indiscretions. The sun's first rays peeked over the horizon, casting a soft light over our world. In that moment, I made a silent vow. If Mark chose to stay, to give us another chance, I would fight my demons. I would fight for us. But the choice was his. And as the city awoke around us, I waited, with bated breath, for his decision. A week had passed since that fateful night on the balcony. The air between Mark and me was thick with unspoken words and unresolved tensions. He hadn't left, but the distance in his eyes told a story of a love wounded deeply. I busied myself with mundane tasks, trying to fill the silence of our apartment. As I sorted through a pile of old clothes, my hand brushed against the smooth fabric of a mask. It was from the masked ball, the night that ignited the latest chain of events. I sat down, the mask in my hands, and my mind drifted back to that evening. It was a charity event, a grand affair with a theme of mystery and intrigue. I went alone, Mark having been caught up with work. The ballroom was a sea of masked faces, laughter and music, creating a world detached from reality. I remember feeling a sense of freedom, an anonymity that was intoxicating. It was there that I met him, a stranger with piercing eyes that saw through my mask. Our conversation was light, flirtatious, and dangerously exciting. As the night progressed, our exchanges grew more intimate, the crowded room fading into the background. When he asked me to meet him in one of the secluded gardens, I knew I was crossing a line. Yet, I couldn't resist. The thrill, the adrenaline rush of the forbidden was overpowering. In that hidden corner, under the moonlight, I gave in to temptation, losing myself in the arms of a man whose name I didn't even know. The memory of that night was a sharp contrast to the present. I looked around our apartment, at the photos of Mark and me, smiling, happy. What had I been searching for in the arms of strangers that I couldn't find here, in the home we had built together? A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Mark, returning from his evening walk. He paused when he saw the mask in my hands, his expression unreadable. "Remembering the ball?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. I nodded, placing the mask back in the box. "It was a mistake, Mark. A moment of madness." He sighed, sitting beside me. "Elise, I've been thinking a lot. About us. About what you told me. I can't pretend everything is okay. It's not. But I also can't deny that I still love you." I reached for his hand, finding it trembling slightly. "I love you too, Mark. More than you can imagine. And I regret what I did, deeply." He looked at me, his eyes searching for something, perhaps a glimmer of the woman he fell in love with. "I want to believe we can get past this, Elise. But I need time. And I need honesty. No more secrets, no more lies." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "No more secrets, I promise." We spent the rest of the evening in a fragile peace, each lost in our own thoughts, yet together. The masked ball remained a shadow, a reminder of a choice that could not be undone. And as we went to bed, the distance between us felt like a chasm, yet there was a glimmer of hope, a chance for redemption. That night, I dreamt of masked strangers and hidden gardens, but above all, I dreamt of a future where the masks were gone, and all that remained was the raw, honest love I still held for Mark. Days turned into weeks, and the strange silence between Mark and me began to thaw, slowly, cautiously. We were like dancers, carefully choreographing our steps around each other, afraid to make the wrong move. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, as I was preparing dinner, Mark walked into the kitchen with a look that stopped me in my tracks. He held an envelope in his hand, its contents already known to him, yet unknown to me. "Elise, what is this?" His voice was calm, but I could see the storm brewing in his eyes. I didn't need to look inside the envelope to know. It was the evidence of my latest affair, one I thought I had concealed well. My heart sank. "Mark, He tossed the envelope onto the kitchen counter. Inside were photos, unambiguous and damning. Photos of me with another man, captured in moments of indiscretion. "How, Elise, how could you continue to do this?" Mark's voice broke, the pain evident. "After everything you said, after all the promises." I stood there, frozen, the lies crumbling around me. "I don't know, Mark. I thought I could stop. I wanted to stop." The rain pattered against the window, a rhythmic reminder of the world outside, indifferent to the heartache within. "Who is he?" Mark asked, his gaze piercing through me. "A nobody, just someone I met." I trailed off, realizing how hollow my words sounded. Mark shook his head, a mix of anger and sorrow etching his features. "Do you even love me, Elise? Or am I just a safety net for you?" His question cut deep. "I do love you, Mark. More than you can ever imagine. But there's this part of me, this destructive part that I can't seem to control." Mark looked away, his shoulders slumped. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Elise. I don't know if I can be part of this cycle of betrayal." I reached out to him, but he stepped back, a clear sign of the growing divide between us. "Please, Mark, let's talk about this. We can get help, see a therapist." He sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "I need to think, Elise. I need to figure out what I want, what's best for me." With those words, he grabbed his coat and left, leaving me alone with the damning evidence of my infidelity. The kitchen, once a place of shared meals and laughter, felt cold and foreign. As I heard the door close behind him, a sense of dread filled me. This time, I feared, Mark might not come back, and I wouldn't blame him. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the rain and the silence of the apartment, I realized that I was at a crossroads. One path led to a life without Mark, a future where my actions had finally pushed away the one person who had stood by me. The other was a path of redemption, of facing my demons and fighting to save what little was left of our relationship. But the choice was not mine alone. Mark had a say, and I feared his decision. The night felt endless, each drop of rain a reminder of the tears we had both shed. In the darkness, I made a silent vow. If Mark gave me another chance, I would do everything in my power to change, to be the partner he deserved. But deep down, I knew that some promises were easier made than kept, and as I drifted into a restless sleep, the crossroads loomed large in my mind, the outcome uncertain, the future uncharted. The days following Mark's discovery were a blur of confusion and solitude. Mark had moved out temporarily, saying he needed space to think. The apartment, once filled with our shared dreams, now echoed with the silence of my guilt. In a desperate search for understanding, I found myself driving to my hometown, a place I hadn't visited in years. The familiar streets and old houses were like echoes of a past I had long tried to forget. I parked outside my childhood home, now occupied by another family. Memories flooded in, of simpler times, of a young girl with dreams untainted by the complexities of adult life. It was here, in this very town, where the seeds of my turmoil were sown. I drove to the local park, a place where I had spent countless hours as a teenager. Sitting on a weathered bench, I let my mind wander back to those formative years. There was someone from those days, a first love, whose memory still lingered in the corners of my heart. His name was Alex, and he was my high school sweetheart. We were young, naive, and deeply in love, or so I believed. It was with Alex that I first experienced the joys and pains of love, the thrill of being desired. But it was also with Alex that I experienced my first betrayal. I remembered the day I learned of Alex's infidelity, a day that shattered my teenage heart. I had walked in on him with another girl, their betrayal clear and undeniable. The pain of that moment was searing, an open wound that, perhaps, had never truly healed. That betrayal had instilled in me a fear, a deep-seated insecurity that I had carried into my adult life. Was it this fear that drove me into the arms of other men? A subconscious attempt to protect myself from being hurt again? As I pondered these questions, I realized that my actions, my continuous search for something elusive in the embrace of strangers, might have been a misguided attempt to reclaim control. Control over my emotions, over my vulnerability. But in seeking control, I had spiraled into chaos, hurting not only myself but the one person who had offered me genuine love and stability, Mark. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park. I knew it was time to leave, to return to the present, and face the consequences of my actions. But this journey into the past had been necessary, a painful yet enlightening trek into the roots of my behavior. As I drove back to the city, the lights of the skyline twinkling in the distance, I felt a resolve forming within me. I needed to confront my past, to heal the wounds that had silently bled into my relationship with Mark. Whether or not Mark and I could salvage our love remained uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I had to try. For Mark, for our love, and most importantly, for myself. That night, I lay in bed, surrounded by the memories of what Mark and I had once shared. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with introspection and change. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to break free from the chains of my past and step into a new, uncertain future. I spent the next few days in a state of introspection, piecing together the fragments of my past and present. It was during one of these reflective moments that I received a call from Mark. His voice was calm, but I could sense an underlying tension. "Elise, can we meet? There's something we need to discuss," he said. My heart raced at the prospect of seeing him again. "Of course, Mark. Anywhere you want." We agreed to meet at a small cafe we used to frequent, a place that held memories of laughter and shared dreams. As I walked in, I saw him sitting at our usual table, his posture rigid, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "Mark," I greeted, my voice wavering slightly. He nodded, motioning for me to sit down. "Elise, I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About us. About everything that's happened." I clasped my hands together, bracing myself for what was to come. "I understand. And I'm sorry, Mark, for all the pain I've caused." He sighed, looking out the window. "I know you are, and I believe you want to change. But there's something else." A lump formed in my throat. "What is it?" Mark turned to me, his expression somber. "I've been contacted by someone, another man you were involved with. He He showed me messages, photos. It was recent, Elise. The room seemed to spin as I processed his words. Another indiscretion. Another secret I had kept from Mark, now exposed. Mark, How many more are there, Elise? His voice was a mix of sadness and frustration. How many more secrets? I had no words, only tears that threatened to spill. My silence was answer enough. Mark leaned back, running his hands through his hair. I wanted to believe we could work through this, that our love was strong enough. But now, I don't know if I can. I reached across the table, trying to bridge the gap that had grown between us. Mark, please. I know I've messed up, more than I can ever make right, but I want to try. I want to fix this. He looked at my hand, then back at me. I need to be honest with myself, Elise, and with you. I can't keep living in this cycle of pain and forgiveness. It's not fair to either of us. Tears streamed down my face as the reality of his words sank in. So, what are you saying? Mark took a deep breath. I think it's time we go our separate ways. I need to heal, Elise. And I think you do too, but not together. Not anymore. His words felt like a final blow, the end of a chapter that I had desperately hoped would have a different ending. I understand. I managed to say, though every word felt like a shard of glass in my heart. We sat in silence, the weight of his decision hanging between us. The Kafka copyright, once a place of joy, now felt like a witness to the end of our love story. As we stood up to leave, Mark looked at me, a hint of the love we once shared in his eyes. I'll always care for you, Elise, but I need to let you go. And with those final words, he walked away, leaving me alone amidst the remnants of our shattered relationship. I sat back down, my heart breaking in the silence of the Kafka copyright. That day marked the beginning of a new journey for me, a journey of self-discovery and healing, a journey to understand why I had sabotaged the one good thing in my life, and how I could prevent it from happening again. As I left the